Welcome to Make Tartaria Great Again, the show where, using only a horse and buggy and, of course, the hammer and chisel, we rebuild the ancient wonders of the realm in no time flat. Now, you know the drill. We're living amongst the ruins of a highly advanced civilization. There's endless evidence everywhere that contradicts the mainstream narrative, and we're just not going to give them a pass anymore. I'm Chris Jolly.
And I'm Matthew Score, and we're your host to helping battle this fake history and science and fake spiritualism, fake scarcity, fake space, fake nukes, fake dinos, and just fake about everything else. Welcome back to the show, and we're decoding the simulated history of our flat Earth plane through a Tartarian lens. We unveiled the Tartarian conspiracy, not just the idea that they were a bunch of nomads running through the plains, but a lot more highly civilized and advanced than we think. Throw into mix that this realm is most undeniably a reset, maybe multiple resets, and that we're starting to understand what's going on. Now that we're searching for proof, get ready to dig into the first piece of evidence. Today, we're going to examine old maps and out-of-print books.
The last time around, we introduced Tartaria as this realm-spanning empire with some grand architecture, maybe advanced technologies, perhaps free energy. It could have been destroyed by mud floods, direct energy weapons, other cataclysms, and slowly erased by those in power. Declassified documents from the CIA hinted its erasure. Works that we looked at, like Fomenko's New Chronology, reveals the selective editing of the timeline and historical narratives, pretty much calling it all into question. Whether it's the orphan trains, the weird stories around the World's Fairs, the hints of resets and repopulation efforts, down to the inexplicable buildings, the monoliths, the mega works of those who came before us, it's obvious that something in accepted mainstream history is totally broken.
We also launched the Project Escape, ESCAPE, an acronym for Ending the Simulated Containment Around Plain Earth. It's our open source initiative to crowdsource evidence of Tartaria resets, historical anomalies, mudflood buildings in your own town, impossible stories, and outright forgeries. With the hashtag Project Escape and Exits Exist, we've got a new group on X that we'll be using to catalog everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So join us in that X community. You can submit all of your information there. You can also use the hashtags you mentioned. But for now, let's examine today's evidence. Some of the maps that show Tartary as this massive empire, out of print and hard to find books that hint at a maybe hidden history, evidence that challenges everything we've been taught about our timeline and historical narrative. There's a lot that we're looking in today, so strap your derriere into your dirigible and let's get going. It's time to make Tartaria great again. You know, Matthew, that's what really struck me when we began to do the research for this episode is just how much there is out there about Tartaria. Countless maps, hundreds of descriptions across a large number of books. There's so much material that the sudden silence of history about it within the last several generations stands out as even more pronounced. So some of the most compelling items we have related to Tartaria are the old world maps, which range from what our timeline accepts to be, say, the 15th to the 19th centuries, that show Tartary or Tartaria as this sprawling empire that goes across Asia, Europe, sometimes even stretching into parts of North America on some maps.
Mainstream history teaches that Tartary was a vague term for this vast region and just a catch-all for Central Asia, a name that the West used for a place that we've never been and didn't really know that much about. Yet these maps aren't just sketches, they're detailed and often beautifully illustrated.
Hey, what should we tell him, Jim? I don't know. Just say it was a bunch of nomads running around on horseback or something. Yeah, that'll work. Well, it's a cute story, bro, and a nice version of that just trust me, bro history. But these maps, the books, the architecture we see, the technology, some of which still remains today, it tells a different story.
It's not just Tartaria. Old maps show things like California being an island or a time before the Great Lakes, the Rupee Niagara, I suppose a giant black mountain at the center of the four directions. The 1570 Ortelius map, created by Abraham Ortelius, a renowned Flemish cartographer, as part of his groundbreaking atlas, Theatrum Orbis Terrarum, considered the first modern atlas. The map, often referred to as Typius Orbis Terrarium, or regional maps within the atlas, included depiction of Tartaria Magna, Great Tartary, a term used in modern Europe to describe a vast, vaguely defined region in Central and Northern Asia, stretching from the Caspian Sea and to the Ural Mountains to Siberia and parts of Mongolia. These maps were based off earlier maps and travel accounts and reports from explorers and merchants.
Right. Now, the next map we're going to look at is this 1684 map by Alain Manasson Mallet, which depicts Tartary with a capital labeled as Samarkand, a city that we find mention of repeatedly in many old books. This map was compiled using earlier ones and reports from missionaries, Russian explorers in Siberia, He even mentions a great Khan who ruled over the land, which suggested a unified empire. Now, the map was included in his work Description de l'Univers, a 5-volume collection of maps, illustrations, and geographical descriptions. Again, the historical story is that Tartary is just referenced as some vague, vast region that we know little about. Well, Samarkand is located in what is now Uzbekistan, which was a major city along the Silk Road during the reign of Timur Khan. Now, the official narrative is that the designation of the city as the capital was this romanticized European ideal. So it may not have actually been the capital of Tartary, but it was a city described to the west first by Marco Polo as a large and splendid city, major hub for commerce connecting east and west via the Silk Road.
The next map, a fairly well-known one, is the Mercator's map of 1569. Mercator is known for the Mercator projection, which is a cylindrical map projection where straight lines represent compass bearings. This is still used today in navigation, however, it leads to a distorted landmasses, making Africa appear much smaller than it is, for example, and exaggerating land size in the Arctic and Antarctic. His map also notes the city of Samarkand, as well as Bukhara and Kambula, modern-day Beijing, based on Marco Polo and other explorers' accounts. He names the region Tartaria Magna to distinguish it from Tartaria Minor, which generally denoted in the region of Crimea.
Next up is Wilhelm Blau's atlases published in his work Asia Novator Delineata. He was a leading figure during the Dutch Golden Age of cartography and trained under the well-known astronomer Tycho Brahe. Now, at one point, the Netherlands dominated the realm of mapmaking. It was a major maritime and commercial power. The book was first published around 1670 and revised in subsequent editions. Now, his map shows Tartaria Magna featured prominently and covering this huge region from the Caspian Sea to the Ural Mountains, going all the way into Siberia, Mongolia, even parts of China. Cities noted include Samarkand and Bukhara, which we've seen before, as well as Tashkent, an early Russian outpost in Siberia. Now, by the time Wilhelm was drawing up his maps, the Russians had already begun mapping large parts of Siberia, so the region of Tartary is more defined and includes lakes and rivers.
While we're on Blau's map, we might as well talk about Wilhelm's son, Johann Blaeu, who continued his father's tradition. The Tartarian map was published around 1645, eventually included the Atlas Major, a crazy big 11-volume atlas considered the most ambitious cartographic work of all time. This atlas was a culture and intellectual achievement, showcasing the wealth and sophistication of Dutch cartography. The map reached elite audiences across Europe, shaping perceptions of Asia.
Yeah, so at this point, we've been getting maps for hundreds of years now. We're going to look at a few more here and then move on to the old books that describe Tartary. Next, we have John Speed's A New Map of Tartary from 1626. He was an English cartographer and best known for his A Prospect of the Most Famous Parts of the World. It was actually one of the first world atlases that appeared in the English language. It was originally engraved in 1626, according to the timeline they give us, and the map appeared in the 1627 edition of that book. It includes some of the major cities we've seen on other maps as well, and has text notes that describes the people, their customs, and the geography of the Tartars. It's actually the first time that Tartary is known to be depicted on English maps.
Finally, we've got Frederick de Witt in his map Tartaris sive Magni Chamini Imperium from around 1680. Producing his work during the Dutch and Golden Age, de Witt was a contemporary to the Blaeu family that we've already mentioned and other Dutch cartographers of this time. This map of Tartary is published both as a standalone and also in his book Atlas Major. This map emphasizes Silk Road trade routes and their importance to the trade network across Europe. Compared to earlier maps like Mercator's and Ortelius's, de Witt's map paints a more clear picture of Western Siberia and Central Asia. This is just a cursory examination of half a dozen well-known maps. But the truth is, a number of historical maps featuring Tartary is in the hundreds, if not thousands, and the term is widely used in European cartography from the 13th to 19th centuries. These maps can be found from sources like the Library of Congress, Wikipedia Commons, and other archives. The Library of Congress has dozens of maps that feature Tartary, with examples going back at least to 1482. Wikipedia Commons has 64 individual files listed in their Maps of Tartary category, and sites like Barry Lawrence's Rudman's Antique Maps, Geographicus, and Carta Historica offer further examples such as Handui's 1606 and 1633 maps. These dealers collectively advertise dozens of unique Tartary maps, with some that overlap across collections.
Yeah, if you ever have the chance, you got a couple hours one afternoon and you're looking for something to do, checking out some of those map collections online is really interesting. Not only will you find a lot of these maps about Tartary that we're talking about, all kinds of maps of the world that show things that we don't see today, like we mentioned before, Chilago, the Great Lakes not being there, all this stuff. But when we view this through the Tartarian lens, the maps become more than just kind of a historical curiosity, right? They're evidence that there was a massive empire, one that seems to be have reset or at least slowly erased from memory and history. They literally tell you, they call them founded buildings. So if you don't pay for it, it's not built. And if it's not built, it's not a building. If you find it, it's found, it's free, and it's Freemasonry. The historical narrative is impossibly ridiculous. All these cities that supposedly pop up in the US in the late 1800s from nothing. And then we get stories of towns with maybe 10,000 people that for some reason have these ornate castles for like banks and hospitals, hotels, high schools. In some cases, this Freemasonry is big enough to house the entire population of the town at the time. Why would these frontier people have a need for such giant ornate structures? How many people would have been needed for the construction? Where were they getting their materials at this time? It just doesn't make any sense.
Well, if Tartary was so vast and had a culture and architecture that spanned continents, why didn't we learn about it in school? Why do modern maps erase it entirely by the 19th century? Some theorists argue that the slow erasure of Tartary from maps mirrors the physical erasure of Old World sites, demolished or buried to hide the truth of a lost advanced civilization.
Well, the debate remains about how much was known by the Western world about the region of Tartary. What is undeniable is they knew it was there, and they knew it was there for centuries. Not only are there maps of it, but reports of Tartaria would come back from the intrepid travelers who actually made the trek and had been there to see it themselves. So while the maps are an important piece of evidence, so too are the many books which describe the land and the customs of the Tartars. Let's get into that now. These largely out of print and obscure books, texts from mainly the 16th to the 19th centuries we'll be looking at, describe Tartary or mention historical events that just don't jive with the official narrative, like pointed to by Flamenco in his New Chronology. They're often hard to find, these books, buried in archives, private libraries and collections, or long out of circulation. In some cases, it seems like they're being deliberately hidden from the public or even memory hold. Now, Marco Polo's description of Tartary is one of the most well-known, and it appears in his travelogue, The Travels of Marco Polo, which he wrote in the late 13th century after his journey through Asia. The term Tartary there refers to the vast regions of Central and North Asia. Nothing surprising here. We've seen this all before. Primarily inhabited by Mongol and Turkic peoples under the Mongol Empire, often called Tartars by the Europeans.
Polo portrays the Tartars as nomadic, living in tents and moving with their herds and horses, cattle, and sheep. Polo describes them as hardy, enduring harsh climates and living without fixed settlements. He claims that they are a people who live in the wilderness in great plains where there's no habitations, only tents. Also that they carry their dwellings with them, made of felt and wood, and their cattle follow. He also points out their discipline, loyalty, and military abilities that allowed them so many successful conquests. They are very valiant in war, Polo elaborates, and their horses are swift. They conquer many lands because of their unity under the Khan. At that time, Tartary had Kabuli Khan as their supreme ruler, the head of Mongol Empire. The great Khan rules all of Tartary, he concludes. And his power is so great that no one dares oppose him, said Marco Polo.
Yeah. Now, before Marco Polo becomes this rock star of travel writing with his epic tales, there's a few intrepid souls who do venture into Tartary. We're talking about friars, travelers, merchants. We'll examine three sources that actually beat Polo to the punch and give us a glimpse of what we call the land of the Tartars. We'll examine the works of John of Plano Carpini, William of Rubruck, and Benjamin of Tudela. Back then, they just gave a name and the place you were from, I guess. Okay, so we kick things off with John of Plano Carpini, a Franciscan friar who was the first European to report extensively on the Mongols. This was in 1247. He was sent by Pope Innocent IV to Karakorum, the Mongol capital at the time, to report what he could learn about these Tartars. His Historia Mongolorum is similar to a medieval intel briefing. It's got granular details on Mongol war tactics, their nomadic camps, #tent life, and the Khan's court, which Carpini actually got to see personally.
Right, and Carpini lays out Tartary as this vast wilderness of horse-riding warriors, always ready to strike. He details the technology, including portable felt tents, yurts designed for rapid assembly and disassembly. They even had composite bows and exceptional range and siege equipment like catapults. Then there were the long-running Mongol postal system with the relay station every 20, 30 miles. enabling very rapid communication across thousands of miles. He explains a hierarchical society ruled over by the Khan and notes the religious tolerances of diversity, observing Buddhism, Nestorian Christianity, and shamanistic practices.
Yeah, these people were so backwards, they supposedly had a Pony Express centuries before we did, but whatever. Our second text is from William of Rubruck, another Franciscan trekking through the Mongol Empire a few years later. This time it's in 1253. His itinerarium is like a road trip journal through Tartary. Now, this friar was on a mission for King Louis IX of France to meet the Khan. He describes everything from Mongol drinking parties to their shamanist rituals and paints Tartary really as a sprawling, diverse place with nomads and their herds moving across endless steppes. The capital at Karakorum, part tent city, part imperial hub. He talks about Mongol metallurgy, like their crafting of lightweight armor and stirrups, and even an amazing silver fountain in the capital that dispensed multiple kinds of beverages. Often his emphasis is on the adaptability of the Mongols and their cultural openness and a surprisingly advanced infrastructure.
Next, we're going to go way back to the Wayback Machine for Benjamin of Tudela, a Jewish traveler from Spain who supposedly hit the road on the 1160s, way before Polo was even born. Now remember, we're just using the dates described by the mainstream historical narrative. We can't confirm the validity of these dates, only the veracity of their story. We know that the calendar systems have been changed, years erased, dates approximated, timelines flubbed. At this point, it's more likely that the sum and even many of the years described in historical events are inaccurate by 10 or even hundreds of years.
Yeah, assuming they even happened and happened like we were told that they did. In any event, his itinerary reads like this medieval blog. He chronicles his journeys through the Middle East and into Central Asia. Now, he doesn't explicitly mention Tartary. This was before the Mongols entered the full empire expansion mode, but he does describe the cities and trade routes and the Jewish communities of those lands. His work isn't as detailed as Polo's, but it does give an early view of the place that would become Tartaria.
After Marco Polo publishes his account, we've got Ibn Battuta Rila, the name Ibn Battula's Rahala in 1355. This Moroccan traveler wandered over 75,000 miles through parts of Tartary, including the Golden Horde's territory near the Volga River. His accounts of cities like Sarahari highlight their cosmopolitan nature, where diverse populations coexisted and the Mongol Khans maintained order from mobile courts and felt tents. He notes the presence of thriving Muslim communities with mosques and religious scholars integrated in the social fabric under the Mongol rule. This paints Tartary as a region of economic vitality, cultural diversity, not really the wasteland of a bunch of backward sheep herders as the historical narrative would like us to believe.
Absolutely. Batuta details this built-out urban center. He talks about Samarkand, for example, as having aqueducts, underground bathhouses, and paved markets. The capital of the Golden Horde at the time, the city of Sarai, had trading networks which handled everything from Russian furs to Chinese silk, Indian spices. They even used paper money, had advanced military technology, including those composite bows we mentioned earlier. Batuta further describes the court of the Khan as this lavish place where sumptuous feasts are served up in golden vessels. There's a bureaucracy that manages trade and taxes, and a vast and flourishing Muslim community with cities that he says rival the Islamic heartland in commerce, culture, and infrastructure. Now, next is Hayton of Corsicas's La Flor de Historias de la Terre de Orient. This is written for Pope Clement V and composed sometime around the given year 1307. It's this fascinating blend of travelogue, historical account, and kind of like crusade propaganda, giving this unique perspective on Tartary from an Armenian monk living under Mongol rule. Hayton, also known as Hidoam, leverages his firsthand experience to provide a detailed survey of Tartary's geography, spanning the deserts of Central Asia to the expansive plains of Mongolia. His descriptions paint this really vivid picture of the Mongol Empire's terrain and its various peoples, emphasizing the real scale and complexity of the region. He delves into the Mongols' customs, their nomadic lifestyle, military organization, and the centralized power of their khans.
Hayton's work is interesting because it got this insider perspective, as his Armenian background gave him different access to an experience of the Mongol world than other explorers. A key theme in La Flor de Historias is the Mongol surprising religious tolerance. Hayton actually highlights this as a defining feature of Tartary's social landscape. He notes the coexistence of Buddhists, Muslims, and Christians within the Mongol Empire, a a policy that allowed diverse religious communities to thrive under the Khan's rule. He portrayed Tartary as a sophisticated empire, which really challenged the European stereotype at the time, and still really the stereotype of barbaric nomads. His book had significant impact on the continent, widely influencing Europe's perspectives on the East and shaping views on Tartary for centuries.
Yeah, these backwards people and their religious tolerance and their embrace of many cultures and peoples. So silly. Our last word given to be from this same time period, before we look at what appear to be more recent texts, is Jamai al-Tawariq, compiled sometime around the given year 1318 or later by Rashid al-Din. He was a Persian vizier and a historian, and it covers the Mongol Empire and the main regions of Tartary. As an insider's account, we get this really detailed and decidedly non-European view of Tartary's achievements, used by later historians to better understand the Mongol Empire. Now, the vizier covers a variety of topics, like the Mongols' ability to make advanced swords and armor, this vast road structure that facilitates the Silk Road trade, urban centers with libraries, observatories, workshops, and other outlets that really reflect this cultural and technological sophistication. Rashid al-Din portrays Tartaria as a pinnacle of Mongol organization, a really interesting blend of nomadic mobility, urban advancements, far from this herd of uncivilized people that the mainstream narrative keeps harping on.
Reports like these would continue to come in for hundreds of years, working to dispel the myths as Tartary is a land of barbarians, backwards pastoralists who lived in movable tents. In the given year of 1557, Said Alis Reis, an Ottoman admiral and cartographer who journeyed through the independent Tartary after a shipwreck, published his Mirat ul Mamalik, or Mirror of Countries. He depicts a culture which is a blend of Islam, Tengrilism, Sufi mysticism. And he also describes the architecture of Bukhara and its many madrasas and minarets, and paints it in stark contrast to the mobile yurt villages.
A few years later, you have Anthony Jenkins's early voyages and travels to Russia and Persia. Now, Jenkinson was an English merchant with the Muscovy Company, and he made a lot of trips into Tartary, establishing trade routes, that kind of thing. Over the course of his voyages, he would interact with the Astrakhan and Siberian Tartars, making it actually as far as the border of the Uzbek Khanate. His insights include information about the Tartars' kinship systems, their shamanistic views, including the use of certain chants and herbs, as well as the spread of Sunni Islam in the region of the conquered cities. Now, Jenkinson also highlights women's roles in herding and tent making, and notes the customs of daily prayers and communal diets.
And then there's the account of the journey from Livonia to Moscow, released by a German mercenary, Heinrich von Staden, in the given year of 1578. He traveled through Tartary in the 1570s, witnessing the aftermath of the Kazan conquest in 1552. His story depicts devastated Kazan Kremlin that had Tartar mosques and bulbous domes, as well as underground baths. Von Staden's account is one of the few Western sources describing the Kazan Kremlin before the Russian reconstruction. The Kazan Kremlin had served as the capital of the Kazan Khanate, a Golden Horde successor state that had fortified the citadel on the Volga River. Before the Russian conquest, it housed the Khan's palace, mosques, and administrative buildings, serving as a trade and religious hub. He goes on to describe the Kremlin as laid to waste by the Russian artillery and fire, with mosques and palaces being reduced to rubble.
Then we have Adam Ollerius. He's a German scholar and diplomat, and he wrote his account, The Much Desired Description of the New Oriental Journey. It's based on his travels in 1633 through 39 as part of an embassy to Persia, where he passed through Muscovy and regions that bordered Tartary. The book highlights Tartary's blend of nomadic ingenuity and urban trade, with this growing Russian influence that shaped its economy. Then about another 100 years on, we get a very lengthy titled book in French by Jean-Baptiste de Halde. I'll do my best. Description géographique, historique, chronologique, politique, et physique de l'Empire Chine et de la Tartarie chinoise. And that was in 1735. The title is a book in itself. His comprehensive work is compiled from reports from Jesuit missionaries in China. It covers the Ming and Qing periods, which included Chinese Tartary. It's a key source for European understanding of Asia for a long time. Du Halde expounds on the advancements in horse breeding, irrigation systems, as well as their adaptation of different Chinese technologies. He writes about Qing fortifications like stone watchtowers along the Great Wall.
Yeah, by this time, it's been pretty much accepted by everyone that the Mongols were a little more advanced than the people had been giving them credit for. Whatever the case, it's the same pattern we see again and again. How is it any different that suggesting that the civilizations who built the pyramids and other megalithic structures were technologically backwards?
Right, it's ridiculous. The winners of history are always shaping the narrative. Speaking of which, by the time we get into the late 1600s and early 1700s, the major part of the land of the Tartars has been overtaken by Russian conquest. It's become a loose conglomerate of states and tribes that's really fragmented and is largely absorbed by the Muscovites. Honestly, the fall of the Kazan Kremlin, which we mentioned, which took place in 1552, and then Astrakhan 4 years later, with the Muscovite conquest of the Volga region, was mostly the death knell for Greater Tartary, leading to its eventual decline.
And true, even a century before the Golden Horde and the Mongol Turk Empire that had once dominated Eurasia in the times of the Great Khan had already begun to disintegrate. And maybe if that's all that it was, a slow dissolution of civilization of a bunch of wandering nomads, that might make sense. But then there's the Russian erasure and classification of parts of Tartary history. There are mismatching suppositions. One, Tartary was the name of a vast region we knew little about. Or two, we have hundreds of thousands of historical descriptions, accounts, and maps of Tartary. Whichever way you look at it, Tartary was something.
Yeah, and as we know, it goes so much further beyond whatever happened in the actual lands called Tartary. This may be just one of the most recent and most obvious erasures of history. Maybe it's true that Europeans just assumed the Tartars were a backward people until they learned better. Maybe the Tartars were advanced in war and metallurgy and lived a nomadic tent-based lifestyle. It seems like they probably did have impressive urban centers in contrast to their life on the steppes. There's still something more there, though, something that goes beyond Tartaria, this larger scale, more grand plan that involves population resets, cataclysms, restarting civilization. Beyond whatever the truth is about the Tartars themselves, it's all but impossible to rationally conclude anything besides, based on the abundance of evidence, that at some point, humans, perhaps even other creatures, life forms, far in advance of us, were here. They've left their fingerprints and footprints all around.
Yeah, we've looked at the maps and the books that describe the region of Tartary and its people and their customs. And of course, we've examined it today is only a fraction of what's really out there available. Either way, there's still a ton that's unexplained. Like if Tartary wasn't a realm spanning empire, who built the castles in North America and that the Europeans seem to have found when they got here? And what of the castles, cathedrals, and other impressive achievements of Europe? What about the fact that in disparate countries and cultures, we see recurring signs, symbols, buildings, designs that hint at a unified people spanning the entire realm? Are the descendants of Genghis Khan the super advanced technologically individuals who created some of the amazing architecture and works that we can still find here on Earth? Maybe not, but that's not what we're saying. When we examine something under the Tartarian lens, we're asking ourselves if it fits a broader pattern of a reset agenda. We do believe that there have been a number of resets and that they are preparing us for another. So we're working to compile the evidence and working with truth seekers like yourself.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Matthew. That's why we've launched Project Escape to end the simulated containment around plain Earth. We want to crowdsource more proof that at least one ancient, highly advanced civilization preceded us.
We're asking you to submit maps, books, photos, and buildings of your own cities that speak of Tartaria, hint at a reset. You know, like the cathedral built in a year by a 12-year-old who won a contest at his high school, or whatever nonsense they try to pass on. Because go to the Wikipedia and read these stories, and you're gonna laugh yourself to sleep. It's ridiculous.
We're building a giant archive of evidence related to Tartaria and population resets, and you can share what you found with all of us. So we're uncovering the hidden past together, one piece of evidence at a time. Share your best evidence with us on X using the hashtags Project Escape and hashtag Exits Exist, and also in our X community there, which is in the show notes below. Help us continue to make sense of our broken history, the suppressed technology, and the reset agenda. Together, every day, we get closer to the truth.
Join us next time as we dive into more of the physical evidence. This time, the old world architecture, castles, cathedrals, submerged windows, and oversized doors that screams Tartaria.
Yeah, I can't wait for the next episode. Those buildings are really a big one for me. So fascinating. So much to look at there. Thanks again, everybody, for listening. Make Tartaria great again. Subscribe to the podcast, share it, and let's get the word out there. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.